Okay. That's really great to see. That's kind of what we're aiming for here. It's just like a starting point, I guess, to start learning about these things and get the terms down. Opportunities for ground source heat pumps. That's interesting. I can talk a bit about heat pumps hopefully. Cool. Play. So when we're looking at retrofit in a context and individually, there's like we're looking at our own houses and we think about our own houses a lot, but in terms of the wider context, the focus for Carbon Co-op really is climate change. You can see in this bar chart here the energy consumption in different sectors in the UK, and this orange one here is domestic. So that's houses and the energy we use in houses basically. It is a big portion of energy use in the UK. And that orange bar is basically broken down in averages in the pie chart beneath for, so you can see like the biggest use of that is heating, but hot water and appliances are just behind that. And that kind of shows where I guess we're prioritizing reductions in energy use, and that heating is a really big one. And hot water and appliances are close seconds, but that's kind of thinking, yeah, and how your house fits into this. So these are general models, and your house might be recreating this, but it might be specific. And yeah, I guess that impact that you're having, and yeah, it's important to see where your house fits into this and how your energy use fits on the grander scheme of things, I guess. Point here. So yes, I'm sure there are motivations for this winter. The energy bills this year have been astronomical. It increases, and we're seeing that this month again. And it is getting a lot of people motivated to make changes. There are a few things. So this workshop doesn't necessarily look at like immediate things necessarily to get done right now, as in like, you know, but about starting that retrofit journey, which is a bit of a longer one, looking at long-term works and plans for your house to get to a higher energy efficiency level. So that's what I'll be covering in this webinar. But there are a few things. So loft insulation, topping it up. If you can access it, it's a really easy win. And you're aiming for more than 250 millimeters, I believe, maybe 250. And yeah, make sure that you're not storing anything on top of it. I think a lot of people like put things on top of the stuff in the loft, squishes it down, and the insulation doesn't work so well. So you can get stands to lift above the insulation, but that's a really key one that I see a lot. Boiler temperature check. So I can send these slides out after, and this has got a link that shows you how to figure out your flow temperature in your boiler. So that's the hot water that goes around the radiators, not the hot water that comes out your taps. But if you set that a bit lower, it can mean your boiler works much more efficiently, and you can save to about 6 to 8% on your heating by just having your radiators on for a bit longer at a lower temperature. And there's easy ways of doing that. So borrowing a heat camera, Carbon Co-op, if you join as a member, you can borrow heat cameras. They'll be sent to your house for like a few days, a week, and you can go around your house looking at where the big heat losses are and start prioritizing works to be done. Air tightness and draft proofing, so seal around your doors, seal around your windows. There's lots of YouTube videos out there on how to do this kind of basic stuff and save and just feel more comfortable in the home. Insulation where you can, and plan your ventilation. If you're doing things like draft proofing and air tightness, you need to balance that with a bit more intentional ventilation. I've seen a lot of people worried about drying their clothes this winter. Obviously not using the tumble dryer because it's quite expensive, but it's quite important to ventilate more if you're drying your clothes inside. So I tend to stick my washing in one room, have the windows open whilst it's drying, and make sure that clothes are not being on the radiator, because that makes a big wet clothes plug that stops your whole house heating up. So that's just a few tips that I'm going to cover for this winter, because I know some people here will be concerned about that. but we're kind of moving on to the retrofit stuff now. So what is retrofit? I guess retrofit's like a catch-all term for energy improvement works for a building. So the term kind of comes from retro, is like going back to an existing house and fitting in new energy efficiency measures. So instead of like a new build that you'd build with all the insulation and all the works in as is, we're looking at older houses, and most of us do live in older houses, and most of the housing stock will be older houses for a few decades now. So this can be like a fabric focus, so insulation, draft proofing, looking at things that make the shell of your home like lose less heat. Or it can be adding new technology. So you can see in this photo, there's solar panels on the roof, and saving energy through like newer technologies. I think it's really important to say that retrofit will look different for every house. It depends on the house type. It'll depend on you living in the house and what your priorities are and what you want out of it. It'll depend on budgets and when work can be done. There's not a one size fits all, and that's where a lot of confusion comes around. I've seen the messages in the chat that not understanding where to start with things, because you start looking at this and it's a massive, overwhelming source of information out there. Yeah, so that kind of just, it's all contextual. It's important. So don't know if anyone wants to type out things that they can recognize in the chat. Here, this is a photo of one retrofit job that we worked on at Carbon Co-op. So this is some of the internal wall insulation. This is mineral wool, if anyone's worked at that before. You can see around the window place. And this is the same house, but a different floor. And we use wood fibre on the inside there, around the windows. So this is the outside. This is an external wall insulation job. I think it's important to say I'm just going through a few measures here, but like wall insulation used between cavity wall, which a lot of people know about, filling out that cavity hole. But if you don't have a cavity wall, lots of older buildings don't, then you'll have to do external facing or internal face insulation. There's different pros and cons to that. I'm just reading. Cork and natural wool for insulation. Those are both good insulation types, and they're both appropriate for various jobs. So the interesting thing about insulation is most of them are so good now that there's very little difference between performance of different insulations. So like the PIR, the plasticky ones will perform just as well as cork will. So it's different. When you're looking at insulation choices, you're thinking about different priorities, I guess. So things like cost, picking natural materials if that's important to you, what works for moisture. In this photo, when they've done the external wall insulation, they did choose wood fibre because they wanted a more natural insulation. However, wood fibre you have to be a bit careful with moisture about. So at the bottom there, you can see the plastic insulations, and that's kind of a protective layer for the moisture there. So this one shows the house that was worked on. This is the same house with the external wall and part of it. So you can see that the side had internal and the front had external, because you can kind of pick and choose different measures for different areas. And you can see the kind of render finish that's been achieved in this one, and the solar PV on top. So these things can look good as well as doing them. In terms of other works for fabric, like improving insulation works, you've got kind of floor insulation, and that will depend on the type of floor that you have, like suspended or solid. There's loft insulation, new windows and door upgrades, and air tightness layers, which are a little different to draft proofing. So draft proofing is kind of sealing up the big holes around frames and things, and airtightness layers is like the plastic sheets, basically, especially designed plastic sheets, but plastic sheets that prevent air traveling through like brickwork. So they're like super draft proofing, basically. So this one shows a lot of people in Manchester ask about terracing and whether you can get external wall insulation and terracing. So this one shows the neighbour doesn't have any insulation, but this one does. So you can do those things. And this one's got the windows. So where technology is now is looking at triple glazing windows to very high performances. But there is cost implications of that. So double glazing may be more affordable, especially if you've got single glazing or very old double glazing. It can be still beneficial to upgrade these things. So as well as the fabric, you then have the kind of heat sources and technology. So this is an air source heat pump on the right here, which kind of works like a fridge in reverse. So whereas a fridge will make inside colder, you want it the other way around, where it makes the inside of your house warmer. They do work more efficiently than boilers, but there is a bit of a cost implication. It's a bit of a question of where costs are going with those kinds of things. But overall, they should be coming down in the near future. So yeah, how noisy are air source heat pumps? Sorry, I am. I said I'd take questions at the end, but I'm getting interested in these. Air source heat pumps, from what I've heard, they're about the same as like a slightly louder than a fridge. I walk past one on my dog walk, so I don't see any thermal bridging risk at the edges. Is there thermal bridging risk at the edges of corners? So we can go over thermal bridging later. I have got a slide on that, and I can answer more about that as well. So ventilation is the other key bit. Like I said, if you're sealing up the house more, if you're changing how air works in a house, you need to be careful with make sure you're getting fresh air in still. There's ways of recovering heat from fresh air using technologies so you can get fresh air in without losing all the heat from it. But it's a consideration that should be alongside all retrofit works, just because you're making changes and you don't want to risk your own health basically with ventilation. So it does produce results. So these houses that we're looking at here, these are part of the Community Green Deal, which is a carbon coat project that's done maybe a few years ago. I think 2014 it started, and we offered out 0% interest loans to a group of houses around Manchester in order to access retrofit works. And these are all like higher end, deep, what we call deeper retrofits. So the big wall insulations and all of these things. And they have produced they cut the gas by about half, and additional CO2 savings by using like solar PV and other sources of energy. The average bill savings were £915 a year. This is pre-energy bill increases. So that would be a lot higher right now, the savings, which is a point on how retrofit kind of does shield you from these increases that we're seeing. So there'd still be average bill increases. But if you are less dependent on gas to heat your house, because your house is naturally kept warmer, then you do have a bit of more protection from these kinds of things. Yeah, and there are lower cost ways of doing the works. These packages were all on the more expensive end. I think the average cost was about £40,000, which does seem like a lot of money. If you're seeing it in the context of general houseworks, extensions, loft conversions, it becomes a bit more of a reasonable idea, I guess. And there are much more efficient, like cost-efficient ways of doing things and lower-end ways as well. But that was an interesting project that was done, and I can direct people to the report from that if they're interested. So these are results. Blue bars are before the retrofit, and the reds and oranges are after. it's a bit different between modelled and actual measured. But and this one's quite interesting. So we have a Carbon Co-op member, Dom, who was part of this scheme, who has been monitoring his energy use for a very long time. But he monitors all kinds of things. This is his living room temperature. So before and after the retrofit, and you can see the orange has much less of the kind of spiking and much less of the lower temperatures, and that's kind of what we're aiming in retrofit is more stable temperatures without the peaks and troughs that come with just sticking on the heating and then having a leaky house that immediately loses all that heat. And this is again Dom. You can see his gas use. So this has been measured since 2003, between 2015. Just a quick point, it doesn't actually go down to 0, it goes down to 0.4. So he didn't completely eliminate gas use. But it's quite interesting because he did about 10 years of work. You can see where he's added new things in. 10 years of individual measures. And they've dropped his energy use. So you've got like the internal wall insulation in the living room, the loft conversions and secondary glazing. Until about 2014, where he had 6 weeks of work for the Carbon Co-op retrofit as part of the Community Green Deal. And that dropped his use massively. So it's that kind of, you can do this work individually over longer times, and lots of us will be forced into that by economic or financial access to money for these things. And that all these works can be done in one period and cause a massive drop like that. It would be useful to see the results of the schemes. It only currently seems an option for people with £20,000 to invest. There are lots of financial problems around retrofit, and there's very, very little government aid at the moment. Our retrofit service that we do, it tends to start at maybe lower ends of about 10,000, but that's for like a full package service. So there are things that you can start doing on a much lower budget. My family retrofitted, well, I say retrofitted, did all these works, like the individual measures, of about 20 years in our old council house. And that made a massive difference. And we did that on a very, very low budget, individual measures when we could, as much DIY as possible. So there are other ways of doing it. Most of the examples we're talking about here are the kind of lump sums, managing to do it in one job. But that, because we've worked with that in the past, but it doesn't mean that it's not accessible in other ways to some extent. So questions to consider. So for any retrofit project, these are the kinds of questions, the key questions to figure out at the start, basically. And Carbon Co-op offers like advice and help in various areas, but a lot of these answers will be down to you and kind of having to learn a little bit to be able to answer these questions for yourself. We will go through these individually, so I'll just kind of ping through them now. So what's your brief? Like what do you want out of this project? It's really, really key to figure out. And that's only something that you can figure out, basically. So what are your priorities? What are the outcomes that you want most of all? What areas do you want to tackle the most? Combined projects or added value? Does it fit in with other home improvement works that you want to do? Or you wanting to do an extension, for example? And then it might be like an add-on. I might as well do an energy efficient extension, for example. Or refurbishing the house, as some people said, in the older houses, you might as well do this work at the same time. Retrofit values and philosophies, so like what's important to you. There's lots of different ways of doing this work, but how do you want it to be done? What's your budget? How much can you spend on this work? Is it a fixed budget? Is it coming from savings or loans? Is it incremental and you expecting savings to build up so you can pay for things over time? Do you need a financial return? Are you looking to invest this to have an improved house and improved quality of life? or do you need a financial return from this? Where's that money coming from? So is it your money? Is it loan money? It'll be different approaches that you take based on that. How are you going to procure the work? So how will the works be done? So there's a time, cost, quality balance, as with all projects. What kind of packages of work are you going to be doing? Do you want one big job? Do you want to do it in separate things? Which things fit together well? DIY or professionals in? There's no wrong way of doing it, I guess, as long as the work's done right. Disruption. Realistically, there's going to be disruption with various works inside the house. What can you deal with? What can your family deal with? Like these are the questions you need to be asking up front. So if you want to put in the chat again, there's a lot of people doing retrofit projects, so this makes it quite easy. What are your top 3 motivations? Is it saving money? Is it saving carbon? Is it comfort? Are you modernizing the house and you want to do it anyway? And what would be your top 1 out of those 3? So you could put like a little star, or you could put a number or something. Hi, Mike. I'm recording this. I can send the recording out, and I can send the slides as well for anyone that has to leave. But yeah, thank you for joining. Yeah, I'll give you a couple of minutes to type this out. It's okay if you've not thought about this before as well. Yeah, if you're just starting to look at this process, be a lot of things, but it will influence what you decide to do, I guess. Money saving, reducing carbon. Carbon comfort. Oh, that show house for the local community is really nice. Yeah, we usually do green open home events in person to kind of show retrofitted houses and have people in them. This year's been a bit difficult, I guess, getting back after COVID. It's been, yeah, people have got busy lives, various things, so that's why we're doing an online one this year. Yeah, I'm gonna start. It's really interesting to see, me at least. Save money, saleability, yes. Resale value of a house is quite a good one, especially now, I guess. People are going to be focusing on that more and more when buying houses, how much work they're going to have to do on it to make sure the bills aren't through the roof. Okay, well, so from a policy side, I guess policymakers are always assuming that the only way people are going to be motivated to do this work is financial returns, like saving money on bills, basically. But what we found with people that have engaged with Carbon Co-op, at least, and done retrofit work themselves, these are the priorities that they've listed. So first priority, you can see in the blue bars, has been saving carbon. And that might be slightly because they're interacting with Carbon Co-op as well, and that like particular group of people, but that has been the main motivation for being involved in this work previously. And then improving comfort is still above saving money as the first priority. In terms of second priority, that's where we see saving money is quite a big one for people. I guess it's that understanding that there are various benefits to a retrofit, as well as just saving money, the thing that people focus on a lot of the time. So this I quite like this slide. So this points out basically for each of these priorities, what kind of work you'll be wanting to do, or you might be wanting to focus on if these are your priorities. So in terms of saving money, potentially new boiler, there's a bit of a question mark there because of the way that funding is changing a little bit with like the boiler scheme and the heat pump stuff. It's a bit difficult to tell where it's going at the moment. But if you have a very old, inefficient boiler, then definitely boiler upgrades is a good way of saving money. And it's a little bit unsexy sometimes when you tell people, you know, if you got like £5,000, you just have to tell people, well, actually a new boiler might be the most efficient thing you can do. But we're kind of phasing that out a bit with newer technologies coming in and priorities in general. Insulation and air tightness, those kind of fabric improvements are a really solid one for saving money. In terms of saving carbon, again, insulation, air tightness, really improving the fabric of the building. At the same time, heat pumps. So heat pumps are on the costier end of things, which is why it's not saving money. But in terms of carbon, they use about a third of the energy, I believe, than boilers. And because they use electricity, instead of gas, that'll be moving more and more to renewables, so it is the more carbon friendly, but it does need to go alongside insulation really. It's important to make sure that the heat pump is working as little as possible, so that it can run more efficiently. In terms of general modernization, you're looking at things like maybe new boiler, insulation, PVs. So insulation, maybe you're like replastering a wall, might as well put insulation on it. Improving air quality, you're looking again at air tightness. So air tightness, we're stopping air coming through routes that we don't want it to come through. So a lot of times air will be coming into your house, it'll be sucked up through the basement, through the subfloor voids, through cracks and crevices, not necessarily the nicest place to get breathing air from. So what we want to do is create a really nice seal and then ventilate in so that we get the air from where we really want it to come from. So like fresh air from outside, basically. Heat pumps may involve change to radiators and underfloor heating, yes. So sometimes radiators do have to be made larger because it makes them more efficient for the heat pumps. Yeah, it is quite a big change, so it should be done alongside, or at least maybe secondary to the installation, definitely. Is everyone muted? I don't know if I can just hear a bit of feedback. Let's check. Okay, it's going quiet, thank you. In terms of improving comfort, again, insulation, air tightness, windows, those kinds of things that keep the heat in your house is going to make you more comfortable. That's quite good. So this is an example of a combined project. So someone was having this like an old extension, old kitchen. They wanted to modernise at the same time. So you can see they've put in a triple glazed window there and a window at the side. They've redone the walls at the same time and upgraded the kitchen alongside, because yeah, if you're doing this work, if you're tearing stuff out, if you're replacing things, it's a really ideal opportunity to be doing energy efficiency works as well, because if you have, say, like it can be done, but if you do have like a polished surface already and you have to go in there and rip it apart so you can add the energy efficiency measures, it makes things a little bit more difficult. Maybe just me, like emotionally. So yeah, it's a good time to combine things if you need that work already. So in terms of retrofit values, I think this one's quite interesting for me. Like I did a a master's at the Centre for Alternative Technology, you get a lot of people coming with different motivations, different ideas of what the future is going to look like for energy efficiency and climate change and everything. And I guess these are the different solutions ideas. So is it all natural or local that you're interested in? So that might be like wood fibre, hempcrete, those kinds of insulation materials. Are you looking at high-tech efficiency? So like the heat pumps, the solar PVs, smart systems, like central control of everything and monitoring of things. Eco-aesthetics, so that's kind of a term for the architectural idea of recreating natural shapes, natural systems. Yeah, it's quite interesting. But healthier buildings, you just want a solid, healthy building that's going to, we spend a lot of time inside. I think it's 90% of our time we spend indoors. So the immediate environment does have quite an effect on your health. And if you've got a very old building that works in like an older way of thinking about buildings, so like they used to think drafts were really good for you because you want lots of airflow, but now we know that that might not be necessarily best. Do you want to upgrade all that kind of system? So budgets, the second aspect of the brief really. So if it's fixed, you need to kind of plan carefully with what you have. So costs tend to overrun with construction projects. You might uncover a problem. Say you're going to your loft to do insulation works and you find a damp patch on the wall that really needs solving, and maintenance is really a priority in a lot of things with this, because making the changes without the maintenance can cause a lot of problems. The price fluctuations, the price of insulation has been going up since the energy bills announcements. So the contingencies might be in a form of maybe a pocket of cash that you save that you're not spending, but it's there in case you run over. Or it might be like additional works, so you'll save something that you'd like to do if you can afford it by the end, but if not, then it's accepted part of the budgetary requirements. Financial return, are you paying back a loan, for example, for this? Do you really need that money coming in from that? So you need to be really clear about, I guess, maybe where the slight risks are with this. So like we've seen the increase in energy costs. If you were relying on energy costs staying low so you can pay back a loan, then you've got yourself into a bit of a problem there. There's a performance gap, and we can talk about that later. But that's basically if it's not performing as well as you expect it to be, for various reasons. So funding, like I said, there's not it's unsure climate at the moment on where governmental funding is. There's small pockets of local authority funding that you're potentially eligible for, but this isn't my area of expertise. I can't really advise on this, but you can contact Carbon Corp if you're curious, or your local authorities, and just ask. So it can be a good way of doing things. That's how my parents managed to get like access insulation works. They definitely wouldn't have been able to afford without it, but it can be really time consuming and fussy to fill out various forms and paperwork and make sure that everything's right. Otherwise you don't access that. So if you're relying on that funding, you don't get it because you haven't done everything correctly. Can be a problem as well. So third part, I guess, is procurement. So this kind of shows the classic time, cost, quality overlap. So compromises need to be made at some point. You can't have it good, cheap, and fast. What I guess we recommend slightly is avoiding the cheap and fast. If someone can offer you a cheap and fast job, I mean, there will be builders that will offer that work. It doesn't mean that they can do necessarily. Maybe it's not necessarily the builders that you want to be doing it that are offering that kind of work. yeah, and if we're looking at quality, this kind of thing, if anyone can recognize. So it was mentioned slightly before, thermal bridging, which is a little bit of a technical term, that basically describes like a gap in the insulated layer. So if you think about a house, and then to think of like a coat going around the house, or one layer just wedged over the house of insulation, if you have like a hole in that layer of insulation, that's where all the heat will go through. It's quite useful to think of a bucket of water with lots of holes in it. If you block up all the different holes, but you leave one, all the water will still run out of that one hole. It's the same when we look at insulation and heat. So, for example, on the left here, you can see above the doors, is, the lintel here hasn't been insulated over, so that's a gap in the insulation. On the right, again, between the windows, that's another point. It is still a lot less, yes. However, heat and moisture like to travel together. So if you have all your heat traveling through one area of the building envelope, then all your moisture will be traveling through that one area as well, which is where you get damp patches. So you'll expect to see damp patches on the inside where thermal bridges are. Yeah, so making changes with insulation is a good thing, but it's important. I think the most common one I see is when people do their loft insulation and they put the rolls down between the loft beams, but they don't put anything over the loft beams, because timber conducts heat quite well, and it conducts moisture quite well, and all the heat and moisture will just travel up through those beams. And as soon as you get wet timber, you've got a lot of problems. So yeah, just that note on that. It's another example here of poor quality. They've just attached that to the outside of the wall insulation render. It's creating problems. This is an example of, I guess, not funding the enabling works. I think this was a picture from a social housing program where they funded the external wall insulation, but they haven't funded the kind of things around it. So this is like a vent that should have been extended so that the wall insulation could cover all of that. But the money wasn't there for that kind of stuff. So they've just left a hole around it, and then you'll get a thermal bridge and you'll get all the moisture on the inside here as well. So that's a really important point, that you can look at the costs for just doing that one thing. But if you need to access that, if you need to do other things around it, then that needs to be put in the cost budget as well. So the performance gap, yeah, so this graph, I believe that this graph is from a report of lots of different retrofit projects. It shows the energy use at the end of the retrofit, and the big red line here is what they were aiming for. You can see that only 3 houses have achieved what they were aiming for. So the knowledge about the performance gap is improving, so this kind of thing should be less of a problem in the future. But basically they can be, if you're optimistic about the savings at various points, then, and you don't achieve it, then you've created more of a problem than just being realistic about the savings. So when this work is done, it's kind of based on a model. So you make a model of the house, you apply the modeled improvements, and you see what that's where you get the expectations from. If you make too many assumptions when you're doing your model, you'll remove it too far from real life, and then you won't get the kind of improvements that you see in the model, because it's real life that we're talking about here. If the works are not done as perfectly as they're modeled, there'll be more heat escaping than is designed for. So that's where like proper training comes in, oversight, making sure work's being done. I remember the external internal wall insulation meeting for a thermal bridge. So there is ways of doing external wall and internal wall insulation, so that you don't have thermal bridges in the very corners where it meets, because that corner you'd think it wouldn't be insulated at all, and then the heat will travel through there. And if you are working on a project where no one thinks about that, then that will be a problem. There are ways of designing around that to avoid that thermal bridge, but it needs to be done on site as well. There's also something about a rebound effect. So if someone's chronically underheating their house, if you live in your house at say 15 degrees in winter, and then you spend a lot of money to get all your insulation done and everything, then most people think at that point, oh, you know what, I want to live in a comfortable house after this. I'm going to turn up the heating a little bit. So they'll turn up the heating to 18, 19 degrees. But that hasn't been taken into account with the model. So you've got an increase in energy use that wasn't expected because you warm in your house, because you can now afford to warm your house. And that's a good thing that we're aiming for. But these things need to be included in thinking about it. So packages of procuring the work. So do you want to do the works in one go? Do you want to do it in separate pieces? So generally the recommendation is to have a plan from the start. So your first step should be making a plan for the entirety of what you want to do. Maybe you can't fund all of that right now. Maybe you have no idea how you're going to fund the future, but like having a plan and following that through on the steps. And then that can be either done as one big go or individual packages. So it can be quite good to think about what stuff works well together. Like if you're doing external wall insulation, for example, it can be a really good time to replace all the windows with triple glazing because they need to put the sill out. They might be taking out windows anyway. It's a good time to do the air tightness around the windows when the wall's are being done at the same time. So thinking about what works well together. In terms of trades, do you want to learn to do all of this yourself? Is that something that you're able to do? Something that you're interested in? Could be. So if not, then you're looking at mainstream contractors or specialist contractors. Mainstream, what we're looking at is we do have a skills gap in the UK with mainstream constructors. That means a lot of the works that we're talking about here, a lot of mainstream contractors won't necessarily have the skills to achieve that works to the standard that we want to make sure there's no problems with it. Specialist contractors, there's a list if you're interested on the AECB, the association, that's escaped me. It's sustainable builders, basically. So specialists can be good for certain jobs, but they tend to be very specialist. So they might be a good triple glazer replacer. They might do well with it, like MVHR, for example, ventilation systems, but they are unlikely to be able to do the whole thing for you. So what we're looking at more likely is like a combination of various things, and deciding when to bring in specialists and when to bring in mainstream. But the most important thing, I think, is everyone understands that plan that you've got, and everyone understands why they have to do certain things in certain ways. So, for example, you don't have an electrician just drilling through your air tightness layer that you put up because they don't understand that the air tightness layer has to be perfectly sealed at all times, you know. So, no matter how good a contractor is, the coordination between all of them really. Thank you. I thought someone might cover the AECB, Association for Environmental Conscious Building. Thank you. No matter how good a contractor is, you really need to coordinate between everyone. Here's a point on contractors. So I guess what you're looking for, you can, if you can't access specialists, they do tend to be very busy as works, especially at the moment. But if you have a contractor that you maybe know, you've worked with before, you trust in them, and they're willing to learn, they're open to listening, to learning of new skills, that can be a really good option. And I'll cover People Power Retrofit later, but they're an organisation that we work alongside that do contractor training. So you can definitely send contractors our way to Carbon Co-op and People Power Retrofit to do that training of the specialist skills, so they can cover that. lots of them have a desire to learn these things, but there's a bit of gap of where to learn these things in an affordable way. Yeah, and you can go off recommendations for other people, but just being wary that what works for someone else might not work for you. But yeah, again, I guess the design has to be right, the coordination right, and the communication between everyone doing the works is a really important thing. Carbon Co-op does not, we don't recommend any specialists or specific contractors for things, partly because they are few and far between, really. There's not many of them out there. The performance and service can change. It can change over time. It can change between different projects. So specialists tend to be specialized in maybe a certain type of building or a certain like the size of project. And they can work really well on some things and then not really gel on other ones. Accrediting is costly and time consuming. So maybe there could be a lot of people out there that can do the job for you, but they may not be accredited because it's a faff and it's expensive for them to do. If you are looking for accredited people, there's various accrediting bodies that I can write a list of at the end, such as like the National Insulation Association. It just means that they know they've done all the training and signed off on everything, so you can trust them basically. And if you're talking to someone that has done kind of retrofit works before, these are some good questions to ask. Again, everything we've covered. Again, we have on Thursday at 6:30, we have a Q&A online with householders that have done this work. So if you're interested, you can, I think there's still tickets for that. I can link that at the end as well. But you should be able to find it if you go onto the Eventbrite for this. There should be a link to the one for Thursday as well, if people are interested. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of covering most of the retrofit basics on this. I'm just going to go quickly over Carbon Co-op and what we do. So we do a lot of engagement work. This is all lovely pre-COVID things that we've done. It has changed a bit more recently. We're looking at getting more training sessions up and running. But it'd be really helpful if you give feedback at the end, if you have anything that you're specifically interested in. We're restructuring kind of the training stuff at the moment. We'd be open to listen to those kinds of things. This is a pictures from the Green Open Home stuff that we've done before. We also have a great big list of pre-recorded webinars, stuff like this, on the website. If you go there, I think it's under what we do and then training maybe or services. Yeah. There's very specific things and wider things as well. And we've got retrofit reports if you're interested in looking at like the UK on bigger scales kind of retrofit, got these kinds of things. Okay, yeah, if you have to leave at any point, more than welcome. Thanks for joining. People Power Retrofit started as a project as part of Carbon Co-op, looking at where the gaps were basically for this retrofit stuff, because we know when we start looking at a retrofit, there's a massive amount of information, there's lots of uncertainties. So we looked at where all the gaps were for this, and we kind of filled that gap of which is now split off as its own service. So it's an end-to-end service. So you as a householder go to them and say, you know, I want to retrofit my house. This is my budget. These are my priorities. And there's advice service, assessments, coordination, designs done, working with specific contractors potentially to make sure that retrofit work is done well and cohesively. It is only available to people in the Greater Manchester area at the moment. So this one's a really good one actually for, no worries, thank you for joining everyone. The home retrofit assessment tool, which it does cost a little bit of money. I can't quite remember now. You're best off contacting People Power Retrofit directly. Basically, they come to your house, look at everything in your house, look at how you use your energy currently, and then like model different improvements, different packages of works, and then they recommend different packages of work. So that you can see in the middle here is an example like scenario. So this is like a lump of work, so it would be really good to do together. Here's the improvements you'd expect to see. This is kind of stuff that you're aiming for. It's I think it's a really good jumping off point. If you're not sure how any of this works, it explains things quite clearly, and it can be a really good one to then start making a plan around and taking.